Namaskar viewers, hello and welcome to Sansad TV. I am Tina Jha, you're watching Perspective. As the global economy faces heightened uncertainty from trade tensions to policy instability, India stands out as a rare bright spot. According to the latest United Nations mid-year update of the World Economic Situation and Prospects report, India is poised to remain the fastest growing large economy in the world with a projected GDP growth of 6.3% in 2025. This is despite a slight downward revision and in stark contrast to the global average of just 2.4% for this year. On inflation and employment, the UN report struck a positive tone. It forecast that inflation in India would ease from 4.9% in 2024 to 4.3% in 2025, staying within the Reserve Bank of India's target range. Further, the report also mentioned some challenges, especially on the external front, with potential trade headwinds and the need for more inclusive employment opportunities. So in Perspective today, we'll explore what these numbers mean for India's future. Can we sustain this growth? How do we mitigate external risks? To talk about all this and much more, we are joined by a distinguished panel. Dr. S.P. Sharma, Chief Economist, Neo-Economist, joins us in the studio. And joining us virtually is Professor Arvind Mohan, Department of Economics, University of Lucknow, Dr. Pankaj Vashisht, Associate Professor, RIS. Thank you, gentlemen, for your time. Welcome to Sansad TV. Dr. Sharma, let me have the first word from you. So as an economist, your first thoughts on the UN's latest report, which projects India's economic growth at 6.3% in 2025, despite the global slowdown and uncertainty. So according to you, what factors are helping India maintain this resilience?
6.3% is a very significant number. I would say this is not only comfortable, but we are the most impressive economy, right, or attractive economy for the world economic system, for the world investors or the global investors. And last 6-7 years were very, very dynamic for the world economy, starting from US-China trade war of 2018 that created a lot of problems for many developing and emerging economies. And GDP was impacted by 0.8%, which becomes at around 1 trillion. USD 1 trillion. But before world recovered from the US-China trade war of 2018, there was coronavirus in 2020. And thereafter, global headwinds of geopolitical developments, deepening geopolitical developments. And again, trade war between US-China and with many economies. Now the Trump tariffs are impacting the trajectory of many economies. But despite all these developments, India's economy remained very, very resilient during the last 4-5 years. I would say after the coronavirus, the resilience has been increased significantly for the Indian economy. As we grew 9.7% in 21-22, thereafter 7%, and then 8.2% in 23-24. And for the current year, if the figures are 6.2 or 6.3 or 6.4, still we are more than 7.5% on an average during the last 4 years. That is a great number, I would say magic number for the many economies, as despite many headwinds of the economic developments, geopolitical developments and the trade headwinds, India's growth remains very, very strong and resilient. And as you rightly said, the factors supporting this trajectory of high growth or the resilient growth, I would say 4 factors are very, very important for the Indian economy, which supported the economy from even in the coronavirus in 2020. Agriculture sector, I would say. First, agriculture, which is very, very resilient sector of the economy, though inherent sector, but going forward, this has become a great support, great pillar of the Indian economy in the recent times, as exports are also increasing from $30 billion to 40 and 40 to 50. Right. And growth remains sustained. Like this year, we are again going to post a more than 3% growth rate, even more than 3.5% growth rate for the agriculture sector in the 24-25 last financial year. Okay. And then the exports, though there were many headwinds of the Red Sea or the geopolitical or many economies facing the high inflation and the high repo rate and all these developments, our exports remained sustained, and we are posting a great number, new high every year, starting from $673 billion, thereafter 776, then 770, and last year $821 billion exports, including the merchandise and services. Then the infrastructure, that is also a great support of the Indian economy and great pillar, as infrastructure spending is increasing significantly from 3-4 lakh crore to recently more than 11 lakh crore infrastructure development in the country, and announcements in the recent budget. So these four pillars are supporting the trajectory of Indian economy. And going forward, if growth remains at around 6% or 6.2% or 6.3% for the next year also, our average growth rate will remain more than 7% for the 4-5 years. So that is the very, very attractive number, not only for the Indian investors or the global investors, but for the markets also. That's why our markets are very, very resilient despite the so many headwinds and so many volatilities in the global markets. Our market remains very, very strong.
So how do we sustain this momentum is something that I'll come to you in just a bit. But let me bring in the other two panelists into the discussion as well. So primarily, Professor Mohan, there are several factors which Dr. Sharma spoke about contributing to India's resilience despite the global uncertainty and the volatility that we've been talking about. In the UN report, primarily what's been credited is domestic demand and public investment for this economic momentum that India is witnessing. Your thoughts on this report primarily. Also, if you could give us and our viewers a sense of how inclusive has this growth been across various sectors, across various states?
I think we are in very interesting times. And in last few years, what we have seen globally is significant destruction of demand all across, whether it's US, whether it is entire Europe, and countries like us, the emerging economies, all across. We have seen serious destruction of demand. And that is something which has been compromising global growth story, whether you're talking about individual countries or the global story. India, in many ways, has been an exception. And one important reason for this is that we are an inward-looking economy. If you look at the overall economy, it is the domestic economy which drives India. External economy is very important, but the main driver continues to be the domestic economy. So the kind of destruction that we have seen globally, as far as demand destruction is concerned, India has been impacted, but much less as compared to other countries. That is one. Secondly, as far as domestic demand story is concerned, it has not seen a serious beating. Particularly if you're looking at the COVID situation, which Dr. Sharma also mentioned. The COVID situation, we saw huge destruction all across, but India could recover very quickly because India's domestic demand story sustained. Other important things which need to be taken into account is one is logistics lines. During COVID period, we saw complete disruption of supplies, logistics lines. India could restore it quickly. And the kind of capital expenditure that India is undertaking across budgets, as Dr. Sharma also mentioned that 11 lakh crore is what government is spending on capital expenditure. This is huge. If you compare it with most countries, major economies, you don't find this kind of demand. You don't find this kind of capital expenditure. Also, our overall investment story continues to remain, is a sustainable growth story all across. As a matter of fact, if you look at last several decades, India has been scripting a phenomena. And one of the major reasons for scripting this is that, for example, in 2009, when the global meltdown happened, during that period, what we saw was India found its investment peak to 37.5% of GDP, a phenomena unparalleled anywhere across the world, but for China. Now, what we saw was that out of this 35.5% of investment was financed by domestic savings. And that is India's great advantage again.
Right.
What we saw in recent times, the kind of disruption in the global story as far as investment flows are concerned, didn't impact India so much. And that story continues, rather it is increasingly becoming even more robust. So, and also the kind of expressways, etc., logistics lines that we are creating, air strips that we are creating all across the country, whether it is air connectivity, whether it is rail connectivity, whether it is road connectivity. As it is often said, Faster you travel, faster the economy grows. I think all these things together are significantly impacting India's story, despite continuing global challenges. As far as inclusiveness is concerned, this has been India's great challenge for last 5 decades now. We have been scripting phenomenal growth ever since the 80s, but the challenge is it has been a story of hollow boxes.
Yes.
We haven't seen growth rising similarly. Even today, for every 1% growth, employment generation continues to remain a huge challenge. It is less than 0.1%. This is one major challenge that India is
Sure,
finding.
Professor, we'll come to this challenge aspect, because the report also talks about
Sure.
not just generating employment, but also making it more participatory and inclusive.
Absolutely.
So that's something that we'll touch upon in just a bit. But
Sure.
Dr. Vashisht, as we've discussed, so public investment and public demand, two crucial drivers of the economic momentum that India has been witnessing despite the global uncertainty. Services exports have also been underlined as a strong pillar of India's growth. How can India sustain this edge is the first question. The second part that we would also like to understand from you is, how are we expanding value-added exports in areas like manufacturing and technology?
Thank you. So basically, let me, you have posed two questions to me, but let me start by saying that this 6% plus growth rate, this is something we have been maintaining for, I think, most of the last 2 decades now. And this, partly my fellow panelists have already alluded to this, and even this report talks about that it is primarily the domestic demand. So if you look at our export orientation or contribution of external sector, we are consuming more than what we are producing. So we are continuously having a trade deficit, but we are helped by the services sector there. And I must also add that the government has been very smart over the last 10 years or so to introduce certain policy measures which were required to unleash and sustain the demand. You know, we started with the economic liberalization in early 90s. And those first generation reforms and their impact was tapering off. And starting from 2014 onward, the current government or current regime has introduced several measures which have made in making investment in India very attractive. So though we are kind of a very domestic demand-driven economy, but I must also allude to the fact that we have been kind of beneficiary of the ongoing turmoil or trade war, this so-called China plus one policy. We are kind of getting some benefit out of it. And this is what which takes me to this value-added export. So, you know, due to this China plus one strategy, we are kind of becoming an important player in certain global value chain. And I must highlight one global value chain, which is the smartphone manufacturing. So if you go back 5-6 years back, we were hardly producing smartphones. We were basically importing a lot of smartphone from China or other countries. But since 2017 onward, this thing started changing. So today we are emerging. I mean, you might have today read in newspaper that the President Trump is trying to nudge the iPhone manufacturers not to invest in India and expand the capacity here. So that's where the value-added export actually have gone up. As the first panelist, my fellow panelist was saying that if you look at India's export, other countries have witnessed it, but our exports have grown year by year. And in fact, if you look at the part and component imports, you will find that more and more part and components of which are used for the manufacturing of smartphone and certain other electronics have increased like anything. But they have helped us to value add it and then send it to the Western country. So the value-added export definitely are playing important role. Services resilience, you know, services are very it has a very special character. So you might remember that in 2007 we witnessed this financial crisis, and then trade collapse and everything. But the services were the first to rebound. So the services are actually a thing for which their consumption cannot be deferred. And India has the proven advantage or competitiveness in these sectors. And that's, since it cannot be kind of the consumption of those services cannot be deferred. Manufacturing, if you are consuming smartphone, you are having one smartphone, you want to change it, you can defer your consumption or new purchase by 6 months, 1 year or so, depending upon the condition. But services cannot be deferred. That's the reason why the services, even if there is some dip, it rebounds very sharply. So since India has kind of developed great competitiveness in certain services, it has been a very important determinant or driver of our growth story over the year.
So in fact, Dr. Vashisht, that leads me to a related question. You spoke about the tariff war actually not impacting India as much, but the question is, the report also warns of global trade tensions. Is India's export sector vulnerable to any of these disruptions that we are witnessing? Is there need for any kind of course correction that should we consider, or we are actually considering in our trade strategy, looking at how things are panning out globally in context of the tariff war?
Yeah, so, we can't say that India is immune to these disturbances. Obviously, we are kind of exporting now around 800 billion worth of exports. And if there is some reduction in the export demand, then we will suffer. But if we compare with India with other countries, we are relatively better off. Because, the trade tensions are basically arising because one particular country has decided that they want to eliminate their trade deficit. Now, whether they will be able to do it or not, it's a different story. But we have to see how much exposure do we have in that particular country. So, if you look at the kind of trade surplus we are enjoying with US, is roughly around 30 or 33 billion dollars. So it's not that big. So in that way, our dependence on that particular market is not that high. Second, our government has been very proactive, and we were among the first country which kind of invested our energy. Rather than going for confrontation, we opted for the consultation, and we are kind of trying to negotiate a trade deal. And US has been having huge trade deficit for a reason. It's a simple reason, because they don't have the cost competitiveness. They have the cost competitiveness in services, and basically they are supplying to the world in terms of IPR. They are earning a great royalty there. So I believe that India is in a position to navigate this situation in a much better way. So one, our dependence on US is not that high. We are not one of the primary source of their trade deficit. If you rank in terms of our contribution to their trade deficit, we will be somewhere around number 9, number 10.
In fact, we are so glad that we are not depending on any country specifically.
Yeah.
And we've been so proactive in our efforts, not just which is helping us not just navigate through these economic challenges, but also on the strategic front, something that we've been witnessing over the last few days. But I'll come back to the report, Dr. Sharma. On inflation and employment, this report has indeed struck a positive tone. It forecasts that inflation in India will ease from 4.9% in 2024 to 4.3% in 2025, which helps it stay within the RBI's target range. What, according to you, should be some of the policy steps that must be taken to ensure that this remains steady while maintaining the growth momentum that we've been seeing?
Yes, Tina, because they have anticipated 4.3%, but our inflation is now 3.1% in 2025. And I believe the overall inflation will remain below 4% for the current year, 2025 or 26. The factors, I believe there must be more and more focus on the supply chains, particularly the agriculture supply chain, so that the prices are not escalated in the coming times, and the supplies remain intact, because food inflation always took the overall inflation trajectory in India that has been observed since the last many years, that when the food inflation becomes high, then the overall inflation trajectory becomes very, very problematic. So we are now comfortable in our inflation growth trajectory, as we have the multi-year low inflation of 3.1% now, and according to data, inflation peaked at 7.7% in April 2022. Thereafter, inflation remained sticky at around 6.5% or somewhere between 6 to 7%, and thereafter 5 to 6% for 1 year from 23-24. But inflation started decelerating significantly from the month of October 2024. Now we have an inflation of 3.1%. And for the employment, I believe there are strong efforts by the government, by the industry, by the people to create employment opportunities for the growing young population. Like we have so many schemes from the government for the MSMEs to create employment. MSME sector is becoming robust and growing in a significant number as compared with the large enterprises. MSME growth is very significant and contributing significantly in the GDP numbers also. More than 31% is the participation of MSMEs in the GDP according to the old definition. So in the coming times, as government has undertaken many reforms, like the reforms for the ease of doing business, reducing the cost of doing business, and reducing the compliances burden on the MSMEs. They have removed more than 42,000 compliances or simplified the compliances that will help the MSME sector to grow fast and to create more employment opportunities for the growing young population, because potential is in the MSME sector to create the employment opportunities, because they have good supply chains now. Earlier, the supply chains were not that much intact before 2014 or 2015. With the advent of Make in India and the reforms for the ease of doing business and the startups and then the Atmanirbhar Bharat and many schemes for the support of MSMEs in the 2020 during the coronavirus period. Now they are significantly connected with the global supply chains, and their exports are becoming robust, and their participation in the exports, total exports of India is at around 45% in the recent years. So as exports are growing and we are making new highs every year, so the employment is expected to come from the MSMEs in the coming times, as the sectors like the labor intensive sector, food processing or the textiles. So these sectors are becoming again very, very strong for the Indian economy, and particularly for the MSMEs to create employment and to participate more in the global export trajectory. And the next is, like we are talking about the Viksit Bharat, and we are in a very glorious journey of Viksit Bharat by 2047, and our MSME sector is contributing significantly in this journey towards Viksit Bharat. I would mention that I was going through some numbers that how the developing economies are facilitating the MSME sector. The MSME sector is a very strong sector of the advanced economies or the developed economies. The contribution is more than 60%, or even some economies are witnessing more than 70% contribution of the MSMEs in the GDP of their respective territories. But in India, still the contribution of MSMEs is somewhere between 30 to 35%. So we have to support the MSME sector more significantly, more strongly, so that their contribution in the GDP becomes more robust and strong, and they are able to create more and more employment opportunities. And the challenges I would like to mention that there are 4 or 5 challenges for the MSMEs. First is the problem of finances, which is now receding during the recent years with the support of the government, various support of the schemes from and the more connectivity with the banking sector. And the cost of logistics is also coming down. Earlier it was very, very high, 14% of GDP. Now in the recent numbers, this is at around 9 to 10% of GDP. And the cost of power is also a significant factor for the MSMEs. Cost of compliances is coming down. So overall, The trajectory of reforms is very strong for the MSMEs, and in the coming times we will see more and more employment creation by the MSME sector in the coming times.
Okay, let me take that point across to Professor Mohan. Professor, you were talking about employment generation and this challenge that we've faced for long, that while GDP growth has been strong, this growth is not translating into enough quality jobs. So we are at a position wherein, despite the efforts, we understand there are several policy measures that have been undertaken in recent years. We need to accelerate these efforts to yield the positive outcome, and especially in context of laying down a roadmap for a Viksit Bharat by 2047, where we make youth the drivers of the change that we are talking about. So in context of all of that, what kind of shift do you think is required? Is the need of the hour towards more employment-intensive growth that India has to see?
Before I come to your question, I think the current tariff war, as we call it, is actually an advantage that India has. If you look at even the agreement that has happened between US and China, the ceiling for them is much higher, is 30%. Ceiling for India, which means that the maximum tariff that is going to be there. So I think the chances are that India will come out as a victorious country if once all these things settle. So I will want to see this as an advantage. Now coming to your question. See, great economic reforms of the 90s, they were the content of reform. Because as we are calling them first generation reform, we couldn't do everything at that point of time. So we took rather focus on certain areas. Industry and service sector is what we focused on. Within industry, our focus, rather the content of reform was such that MSME remained outside the purview of that reform story. Agriculture remained outside the purview of that reform story. I have always believed that India is a 3-engine aircraft. First engine, that is the industry and service sector, we opened. Remaining 2 engines, remaining 2 pillars, as you can call it, are human development, that is health and education, and also rural development, primarily agriculture and allied activities. Now, these are things which are the future of India, are the future of the world. Most international organizations today believe that the 21st century will be driven by 4 major engines. Agriculture as an industry, agricultural food processing, textile, and knowledge. These are 4 major engines which are going to drive. India, interestingly, has advantage in all these 4 areas. And that is where there is a huge reason to focus on second generation reform. My fellow panelists mentioned some of the major areas. We are doing things right. But there is a huge area that we need to focus on. Agriculture, we have to completely open it. This is something very interesting. I'll recall during Manmohan Singh's period, Obama was visiting India. When press asked him that, why are you going to India? Global meltdown has just happened. He said that I'm going to India to seek market access. What he was asking for was access to India's market, particularly India's rural market.
Right.
We have a huge market. We have to open it for our own industry. And agriculture is an area, MSME is an area, when it grows, it will also generate employment. I will want to believe that we have been focusing too much since 1950s till date on growth. Always employment generation has been on the periphery. Time has come for paradigm shift. Let us focus on policies which generate employment. Trust me, this is an area, this is the direction. Once it begins to happen, it will also generate growth for 140 crore people.
Absolutely, very crucial, especially in terms of long-term strategy and outlook, Dr. Vashisht. So in that context, if I may also club what the UN report has mentioned about some gender disparities in employment that persist. But we understand there are policy interventions, there are various measures that have been undertaken in recent years to make employment more inclusive and participatory. But in the long-term vision, if we are to make it more participatory, and when we are talking about accelerating efforts at various levels, what would your suggestion be?
So, before I answer your question, can I add 1 or 2 points on employment story per se? I mean, very briefly, we must have to appreciate one thing, that we are going through a very interesting phase. We are living in an era which is marked by significant and rapid technological change, and this technological change is per se is labor saving. And at the same time, we are going through a phase of demographic transition. So on supply side, the supply of labor is increasing every year. So many people are joining labor market, but at the same time, we are going through a phase where the demand side for given per level of output, day by day, the demand for labor is declining. So that's why we are having a significant challenge. And if you go to the market, you will find that people will say that I don't have a job, and employer will say I don't find people to employ. So there is this mismatch of skilling, which is the kind of long-term issue which for last 10-12 years the present government has been trying to address through several initiatives, and the latest one is the new education policy. Now let me come to the issue of inclusivity in employment. You know, even at that point, the things have started changing. So if you look at the overall labor force participation of female, it was declining, and it was declining at an alarming rate. But if you look at the recent trend, there is a healthy reversal in the trend. So now the labor force participation of female has actually jumped, and jumped quite impressively. And partly I will give the credit to the relentless focus of the current government on promoting the women-led development, and giving and creating policy environment which is more conducive for the government, for the females to go and seek employment. But we must also remember that the participation of female in labor market or employment depends upon several societal issues also. So it's a societal problem which takes a lot of time to solve. So if you compare India's labor force participation of female with, let's say, Japan or West, we stand nowhere. I mean, we are very low as compared to that, but it is going up. But we need societal change to make the changes there, because you'll find that even the educated women, if they end up in some sort of a good paying government job, they are fine. Otherwise, they'll say, okay, if my husband is working, I'll stay back and take
Certainly,
care
I
of
think
my
I think
kids.
there are reforms at various levels which are required, because the entire ecosystem has to be enabled that way, which is friendly, which helps working women adapt despite the multiple responsibilities that they hold. But that's an interesting discussion. Perhaps we could sit together and discuss that. That could make for another edition of Perspective. But for now, time allows me to take up only that much on this program, talking about the economy and what the UN report has projected about India's growth. So thank you once again to all three of you for joining us in this edition of Perspective, sharing your thoughts and your views with us and our viewers. And to your viewers, thank you very much for your time as well.